Okay, so let's begin, class. Our topic for today will be the second chapter on home office and branch accounting. And I hope you have gone over your textbook in this chapter, class. And I hope you were able to notice that the primary difference here is that the shipments from the home office to the branch will now involve a markup that is being added by the home office. This means that the value that will be received by the branch will not necessarily be the actual or the true cost of the inventory. But of course, the branch will not know anything about the true cost of the inventory as far as the branch is concerned. Whatever is the build price given by the home office, that would be the cost as far as it is concerned. Okay, so the issue really here is on the perspective of the home office because the home office adds a markup on the shipments that it gives to the branch. I hope as you try to prepare for the recitation today, you were able to notice that the significant portion of the discussion will revolve around the markup surrounding the shipments made by the home office to the branch. Okay, we'll try to deal with them as we come across the different peculiarities of the markups class as they are presented to us in the problems. Let us start with problem 12-1, which involves the preparation of your journal entry. The home office ships merchandise to the branch at 20% above cost. How should a shipment costing 60,000 be recorded by the home office? Okay, so as what we have discussed before, ordinary shipment from the home office will be recorded by the home office as debit investment in branch and credit shipments to branch. Okay, but that will not be the answer here, class, because again, the shipments made by the home office here are not done at cost. The shipments made by the home office includes a markup. Okay, this is one way for the home office class to make sure that the branch is profitable. So that even though the branch operations will yield only small profit class, it would not be a big problem because in the first place, the inventory of the branch is already bloated. Okay, the home office already jacked up the prices that is considered as cost by the branch. So even if the branch income as reported by the branch is low, that will not be a big problem as far as the home office is concerned because the home office knows that the profit of the branch is understated. Why? Because the home office has overstated the value of the inventories that are sent to the branch. Why do we say that the shipments by the home office will affect the income of the branch class? Because again, if you overstate the goods that you are shipping to the branch, remember that that amount will be considered by the branch as its cost, and that will be the amount that will form part of its cost of goods sold. And if your cost of goods sold is big, then you can expect your gross profit to be small. So if your cost of goods sold is overstated in the eyes of the home office, then in the eyes of the home office, the net income of the branch would be understated. Okay, so by overstating the by bloating the prices on the goods transferred to the branch, the home office is in one way or another making sure that the operations of the branch will be profitable. Okay, but going back to this problem, what is our normal entry for an ordinary shipment? It would have been debit investment in branch and credit shipments to branch. But that will not be an answer here because we will have to take into account, class, the amount of markup we have included in the shipment. This is one way for us to monitor the markup on the goods that we have transferred to the branch. So the entry here, class, would be to still debit investment in branch, still credit shipments to branch, but you will have another credit to the allowance for overvaluation of your branch inventory. The account title is very mouthful, class, but we will simply call this as the allowance account. Okay, moving forward, we will simply call this as the allowance account. Okay. Now, there are other problems, class, that will use a different account title. You will be on the top of my head, I cannot give you another example. But I want to tell you as early as now that there will be problems wherein they will use a different account for our allowance account. And my advice to students, even from the past, is to try to answer as many problems as they can so that they will be familiar with the different ways or the different account titles that can be used in the problems to replace your allowance account. And with that, I encourage you to go over the problems in Diag. The Diag will use different account title aside from the allowance account. Okay. Uh, so our issue now is as to the amount. So as to the credit to your allowance, class, you will just have to determine how much is the markup on the inventories that were transferred. Okay. And what does the problem tell us? That the cost of the shipment is 60,000. Okay, so the next thing for us to do is to determine how much then is the markup on this shipment. Okay, and the problem tells us that the markup is, or that the shipments are billed 20% above cost. So you will have to get 20% of uh, the 60,000, and that will give you 12,000. Okay, so the credit to your allowance, class, would be 12,000. Okay, and important concept, class, please do not forget that the amount that will enter your shipments to branch account, that the amount that will be credited to your shipments to branch account every time there will be a shipment, class, is should always be at cost. Please remember, this will help your analysis in more complicated problems, class. The shipments to branch account will always be at cost. It will represent the true cost of the goods that were shipped or transferred to the branch. Very important. Okay. Now, if you will be asked, what then is the billed price? What then is the billed price of the goods that were shipped to the branch? The answer would simply be the cost plus the markup. How much is the cost? 60,000. How much is the markup? 12,000. So if you will be asked, how much then is the billing price of the goods? Our answer would be 72,000. Okay. Now, if you will be asked, at what amount will these goods be recorded by the branch? At what amount will these goods be recorded by the branch? Our answer would be 72,000. Then you would ask, isn't the rule for pass two, isn't the rule for inventories is to measure your inventories at cost? That's true, that's correct. But why then will the branch be recording the shipments from the home office at 72,000? It's because as far as the branch is concerned, the cost of these goods is 72,000. So are we still complying with pass two? The answer is yes. It's just that as far as we are concerned, as far as the branch knows, the cost of the goods is the price billed by the home office. And at what price was it billed by the home office? It would be 72,000. And will that have any significance in your reciprocal accounts? The answer is yes. Because how then would this transaction be recorded? How then would this transaction be recorded by the branch? The entry in the books of the branch would have been debit, shipments from home office, and credit, home office. No difference as to the debit and credit, but where will the difference lie? On the amount. How much would be the debit to your shipments from home office, and how much would be the credit to the home office account? It would be 72,000. Because as far as the branch is concerned, the amount of investment, made by the home office is the 72,000 and not the 60,000. The branch does not know of the 60,000. The branch only knows of the 72,000. And that is why, class, for problem 12-1, the debit to investment in branch will also be 72,000. Okay, remember, the amount of credit or debit to the home office should also be the same amount of debit or credit to your investment in branch account. So the complete answer here would be debit investment in branch for 72,000, credit allowance account for 12,000, and credit shipments to branch for 60,000. Okay, So please remember, the amount that will go into your reciprocal accounts would be the billed price. Okay. Now we've mentioned earlier that one of the important takeaways for today would be that the shipments to branch account will always be at cost. The shipments to branch will always be at cost. Okay. Again, that knowledge will be useful in analyzing more complicated problems later on. Now, in the books of the branch class, I want you to also remember, okay, that the shipments from home office account will always be at billed price. Okay, will always be at billed price. If the home office bills it at cost, no problem. Okay, but if the home office bills it above cost, then that means your shipments from home office will include the markup on the shipments. That will be very important again in analyzing more complicated problems later on. The shipments to branch is always at cost. The shipments from home office account always at billed price. Okay. When I say that those concepts will be useful in more complicated problems class, the the easiest example I can give you, class, is if you are asked, how much then is the markup on the shipments? What are you going to do? Simply compare shipments to branch and shipments from home office. Because what would be our expectation as to the difference between your shipments to branch and shipments from home office? Is that the shipments from home office includes the markup, while the shipments to branch does not include the markup. So if you'll be asked how much is the markup on the shipments, just compare shipments to branch and shipments from home office. Okay. Will there be a scenario that wherein that analysis will not work? The answer is yes, especially if there are shipments in transit. But that will be for a discussion on another day, class. As of now, what is important for me is that you remember that shipments to branch are always at cost, while shipments from home office is always at billed price. In the previous chapter, the billed price was always at cost. In this problem, there are now instances wherein, in most instances, the shipments made by the home office will now include a markup. Okay, so our billed price will include the markup. Now let's focus on the allowance account. What will be the nature of the allowance account? This would be a form of a liability, class. This would be similar to an unearned revenue or an earned income account. Okay, so that is why at the start of the semester, it was important for me that you are familiar with the nature of your deferred revenue or deferred income. Deferred revenue or deferred income, just the same as your unearned income or unearned revenue. So your allowance account behaves in the same way as an unearned income, because that is essentially what the allowance account is. Okay, you are adding a markup on the inventories that you are transferring to the branch. So anytime the inventories are sold, you will also have a profit. Okay, you will only be able to realize this allowance account. Again, as I've mentioned, the allowance account is an unearned income account. So when will this unearned income be considered earned? Only when these goods are sold to outside parties. Okay? But while the goods remain with the branch, it will still continue as an unearned income. Okay? Because this revenue can only be earned through sale of the goods related to the allowance. Okay? And the transfer to the branch is not considered as a sales transaction because it still remains within the entity. So when will this unearned income account be considered earned? It will only be earned once the goods held by the branch are ultimately sold to outside parties. Okay? So I hope that's clear. Very important takeaways from problem 12-1. Let's proceed to problem 12-2. The home office ships merchandise to its branch at 20% above cost. The branch's books shows a beginning inventory of home office merchandise of 30,000 and shipments from home office of 180,000. What is the balance before closing in the allowance for overvaluation of your branch inventory account? So we can immediately answer this one, class, but I want us to understand first as to what comes in and what comes out of your allowance account. Okay? When does the allowance account increase, class? When does the allowance account increase? It increases every time there are shipments made by the home office that are billed above cost. Anytime the home office makes a shipment with a corresponding markup, the amount of markup will be added to your allowance account. So those would be the increases to your allowance account. When does the allowance account decrease? When does the allowance account decrease? It will decrease the moment it is earned. It will decrease the moment it is earned. And when is this account considered earned? When is the allowance account considered earned? When the goods related to them are sold to outside parties. Okay. Uh, Although this is not directly used in the problem class, I want you to master this one. Uh, I will just say it, then you just write it down. Plus the beginning balance of the allowance account. The beginning balance of the allowance account represents the markup on the beginning inventory of the branch. Okay, these are concepts that you will have to use for you to be able to analyze more complicated problems down the road. The beginning balance of the allowance account represents the markup on the beginning inventory of the branch. And as mentioned earlier, when does the allowance account increase? When does it increase? Every time there is a markup on the shipments from home office. Okay. So the increases to the allowance account, you may write this down. The increases to the allowance account represents the markup on the shipments from home office. Okay? The increases to the allowance account represents uh, the markup on the shipments from home office. The increases to the allowance account represents the markup on the shipments from home office. Now, what are the decreases? When will the allowance account decrease? When the goods related to the allowance are sold to outside parties. And when will the decrease normally happen, class? When will the entry decreasing the allowance account normally be prepared? Only as part of your closing entries. Okay, so what does that mean? Throughout the year, you will have the beginning, but at the start of the year, you will have the beginning balance. Throughout the year, what will happen? Shipments will happen. So throughout the year, beginning with the beginning balance, the allowance account will only keep on increasing because we will only decrease it at the end of the year. Okay, so that is why when the question in problem 12-2 class is asking for the balance before the closing class, what is it actually asking from us? It's asking from you the markup on the beginning plus the markup on the shipments. Okay? So if it's asking for before closing, what's normally happening there? Only shipments. Okay? So the balance of your markup before closing would simply be the markup on the beginning plus the markup on the shipments. Okay? Now, beginning plus shipments class, what do we call that one? Assuming no purchases to outside parties. Assuming no purchases from outside parties. If you add beginning inventory with your shipments from home office, what will you get? You would get your total goods available for sale. And why am I bringing that up? Because basically, class, the unadjusted or the before closing balance of your allowance represents the markup on your tigas. Again, what is our tigas? Beginning inventory plus shipments from home office. You may include purchases. It does not matter because your purchases does not have any markup. Okay? So, if you're asked for the before closing, before adjustment balance of your allowance, what is it asking from you? It is asking from you the markup on the beginning and the markup on the shipments. Or simply, it is asking for the markup on your tigas. it is asking for you for the markup on your total goods available for sale. Okay. Now, going back to the decreases. Again, when does the allowance decrease? When does the allowance decrease? It decreases when the goods related to the allowance are sold. Okay? And when do we normally determine the goods that are sold? Only at the end. Okay? So this means, class, that the amount of decrease to the allowance account represents the markup on the goods that were sold. So in other words, the decrease to the allowance account represents the markup on the cost of goods sold of the branch. That's another thing that is very important to remember, class. The adjustment or the deduction or the decrease to the allowance account represents the markup on the cost of goods sold of the branch. Okay? Remembering these relationships would be very important, class. The amount of decrease, the amount of adjustment, the amount of deduction to your allowance account to arrive at the ending balance simply represents the markup on the cost of goods sold of the branch. Okay. And lastly, how do we normally compute for cost of goods sold, class? How do we normally solve for cost of goods sold? Beginning plus shipments plus purchases will give us our total goods available for sale. With our total goods available for sale, what do? We deduct our ending inventory. Okay. And if we now analyze the allowance account, beginning balance of the allowance, what are the increases? The markup on your shipments, okay, which will give you the markup on the tigas or which will give you the unadjusted balance of the allowance. If you're looking for the markup on the cost of goods sold, how else can you arrive there? Again, going back, what did we say about the markup on the cost of goods sold, class? The markup on the cost of goods sold represents the decrease or the reduction to your allowance account. But how else can you arrive there? You simply deduct the markup on the ending inventory, class, from the markup on your tigas. Um, Again, I would just want to emphasize this one. Markup on your tigas minus markup on ending will give you your markup on your cost of goods sold. Markup on your tigas minus markup on your ending will give you your markup on your cost of goods sold. And class, the problem will just circle around these concepts, class. Because again, your markup on your ending will essentially be the ending or the adjusted balance of the allowance. Okay? The markup on your ending inventory is simply the ending balance also of your allowance account. This would be clarified more, class, as we discuss more problems. Okay, let's focus on problem 12-2. What does problem 12-2 tell? Ask from us. What is the balance before closing in the allowance for overvaluation of branch inventory account? Again, when we say before closing entries, before adjustments, what does this allowance represent? It represents the tigas, which is composed of what? The markup on your beginning and the markup on your shipments throughout the year. Okay, and are we given with the amount of shipments at the start, the beginning inventory, class? The branch's books show a beginning inventory of home office merchandise of 30,000. Okay, so do we need the markup on the 30,000? Yes. The answer is not the 30,000 because what we need to get our answer is the markup on the 30,000. The issue now is how much is the markup on the 30,000? Is it 6,000 or is it 5,000? Do you multiply the 20% with the 30,000 or do you divide 30,000 by 1.2 and multiply it by 20%? How much is the markup? 30,000, 5,000 or 6,000? You go back to our theory class. The records of the branch, as far as the inventories are concerned, are always at billed price. Records of the branch, always at billed price. So that means this 30,000 already includes the markup. Okay? Plus, if the 30,000 was at cost, if the 30,000 is at cost, what would have been our procedure, class, to determine the markup? We would have simply multiplied 30,000 with 20%. But since the 30,000 is already the build price, what do we do first? Divide 30,000 by 120% to get the true cost of 25. Multiply 25,000 with 20%, you will get the markup of 5,000. But how did we know that the 30,000 is at build price? How did we know that the 30,000 includes the markup? Because this 30,000 was taken from whose records, class? Branch. And again, the branch does not know anything of the true cost. It only knows of the build price. Okay? Uh, so the markup in the beginning inventory is 5,000. And then shipments from home office, 180,000. What do we do with the 180,000? Multiply it by 20% or uh, divide it by 1.2 and multiply it by 20%. We will have to divide 180,000 by 20% to arrive at the cost. Why do we know that the 180,000 is not yet the cost? Why do we know that the 180,000 is not the cost? Is not the cost. What do we know of the shipments from home office account? It is always at bill price. And who maintains the shipments from home office account? The branch. And the branch only knows of the bill price. So the 180,000 here is still at the bill price. Okay? Plus, if the problem have stated shipments to branch of 180,000, then to get the markup on the shipment, we will only have to multiply it by 20%. Because what do we know about the shipments to branch account? It's always at cost. But if it's shipments from home office, it is already at billed price. Okay? So how much then is the markup on the 180? You divide 180 by 120%, you would get 150. What does the 150 represent? That represents the cost of the shipments during the year. So is it possible for you to answer how much was the shipments to branch during the year? The answer is yes. How much is the shipments to branch during the year? Your answer would be 150,000. The cost of the shipments from home office. Is that clear? So this can be a shotgun problem already. Okay, how much is the beginning balance of the allowance account? Okay, as what we have answered earlier, how much, class? It's 5,000. Okay. First question, how much is the beginning balance of the allowance? 5,000. Second question, how much is the shipment total shipments to branch during the year? 150,000. Okay. So how much then is the markup on the shipments, class? It would be 30,000. So can we now get the markup on the tigas, class? Yes. What's the composition of the markup on the tigas? Just the markup on the beginning and the markup on the shipment. Pilay markup sa beginning, class? 5,000. Pilay markup sa pilay markup sa shipments, class? 30,000. So the markup on your goods available for sale for goods coming from the home office would be 35,000. Okay, so that would be the answer in problem 12-2. Again, very simple lang. If it asks for the before closing or before adjustment balance of the allowance, what does it represent? The markup on your tigas. Okay. So again, how did we arrive at 35,000? 5,000 plus 30. The 5,000 is the markup on the beginning. And then the 30 is the markup on the shipments during the year. Okay? Alternative solution. Alternative solution. You solve for your tigas. Okay, again, how do you solve for tigas? Beginning plus shipments plus purchases. But purchases would not be relevant because purchases does not have any markup. Okay? So, plus pilay beginning inventory, 30. Pilay shipments from home office, 180. So your total goods available for sale for goods coming from the home office is 210. Now simply solve for the markup on the 210. 210,000 divided by 120 will give you 175 times 20%, that will still give you 35,000. Okay? So we have two ways of computing for the 35,000. 5,000 markup in the beginning plus 30,000 markup for shipments during the year. Okay, alternative solution, compute for total goods available for sale and get the markup on your total goods available for sale. Total goods available for sale is 210 computed by adding 30,000 and 180,000. Okay? And then you would get 210. 210,000 divided by 1.2 times 20% will give you the 35,000. Now, which of the two solutions do I prefer you to master class? Which of the two alternative procedures do I want you to always use? The first or the second? The first. Why do I want you to use the first class? Because the second solution, our alternative solution, does not always work. When does it not work? If the markup rate from the previous year is different from the markup rate for the current year. What do I mean? If the markup rate class is different for last year, you will have to use the markup rate last year for our beginning inventory. Why will we use why will we use the markup rate from the previous year for our beginning inventory class? Because for goods forming part of our beginning inventory, when was this shipped? This was shipped the previous year. So the relevant markup here is the markup rate from the previous year. Okay? So you cannot just add all your you cannot just compute for your tigas by adding your beginning and ending and using the same solution if the markup rate for the previous year is different from the markup rate for the current year. Okay? And I hope you understand why we will have to use the previous year's markup rate for our beginning inventory. Because these goods were shipped the previous year. The markup related to our goods forming part of beginning inventory is the markup rate from the previous year. Okay? So I want you to always compute for the markup on the beginning and then the markup on the shipments. Okay? Plus, markup on ending. What rate will be used? The markup rate for the current year or the markup rate for the previous year? If you're looking for the ending balance of the allowance, you will use the current year. Or are you supposed to get the average from the previous year and the current year? The answer is no. If the problem is silent, first in, first out. So that means the goods forming part of your ending inventory came from the later shipments. Okay? But it's a different story if your ending inventory is greater than your shipments during the year. Okay, but let's not confuse ourselves as of this point. Okay. Let's proceed to problem 12-3. The home office ships merchandise to the branch at 25% above cost. If the balance before closing in the intra-company inventory profit account is 66,000 and shipments from home office amounted to 300,000, what was the cost of the branch's beginning inventory? If you answered this, I would expect you to have a wrong answer, especially if you have gotten the old solutions manual. Okay. The 66,000 class. Let's try to understand the 66,000. What does this this is the another name for your allowance account class. Okay. The intra-company inventory profit account. Diba I told you to try to take note of all the different ways the allowance account can be called. Okay. So understand that the intra-company inventory profit account is just the same as your allowance account. And what does it represent? It simply represents the markup on the goods coming from the home office. Okay. So the 66,000 plus is the balance before closing. So what does this mean? As what we have established earlier, that the 66,000 represents what? The markup on your tigas. Okay? This represents the markup in the beginning plus the markup on the shipments during the year. Okay? Now, Do we have our beginning inventory? The answer is no. That is what is being asked. Okay. What do we know, class? That the shipments from home office is 300,000. Is the 300,000 at bill price or at cost? Bill price. Shipments from home office account always at bill price. Now, I want you to work back, class. If you already know that the 66,000 represents the markup on your tigas, how much then is your tigas? How much then is your total goods available for sale? Remember that the markup rate is based on cost. So that means the 66,000 is 25% of the cost. How much then is the cost? Okay. First thing to do would be 66,000 divided by 25%. And that will give you how much, class? 264? How much? 264? Plus, we should have the same answer. 66,000 divided by 25%. 66 divided by 25%. 264,000. Okay. The question now is the 264 our tigas at bill price or our tigas at cost? That is still at cost, class. Okay? The 100% is the cost. But what am I asking, class? What am I asking from you? I'm asking from you the tigas at bill price. So what do you do with the 264? Multiply it by 125%. Or simply add the 66. 264 times 1.25 will give you how much? 330,000. So that would be the tigas of the branch. Okay? The 330,000 is the tigas of the branch. I hope that's clear. Now, what's the composition of your tigas, class? It's beginning plus shipments during the year. How much is our tigas, class? 330. How much was the shipments during the year? 300 given the problem, class. Okay, I hope you're still able to follow. Tigas at bill price is 330. Shipments from home office or shipments during the year at bill price is 300. So what does that tell us? That the beginning inventory is 30,000. But the 30,000 is still at bill price. Is that what is being asked in the problem? The answer is no. The question is, what was the cost of the branch's beginning inventory? So what are you going to do? Solve for the true cost of the 30,000 beginning inventory. And how do you do that? You remove the markup. Okay, so what do you do? 30,000 divided by 125%. 30,000 divided by 125% will give you 24,000. And that will be your answer. Okay, so our answer here will be 24,000. Alternative solution. Class, di ba the 66,000 represents the markup on the tigas? Okay, so for you to get the markup on the beginning, what can you do? The 66,000 is the markup on the tigas. To get the markup on the beginning, what do you think you can do? You deduct if the 66,000 is the markup on the tigas, what can you do to get the markup on the beginning? You deduct the markup of the shipments. Okay, solve for the markup on the shipments, class. How much is the shipments from the home office? 300,000. But this is at bill price. What do? You divide 300,000 by 125%. And that will give you 248,000. 240. 240,000. And multiply that by 25%. How much is 60,000? So what does the 60,000 represent? It represents the markup on the shipments. So if you deduct the 60,000 markup on the shipments from the 66,000 representing the markup on the tigas, you would get 6,000. And what will that 6,000 represent? It will represent the markup on your beginning. And do we already have were we able to solve earlier the beginning inventory class? Yes, it was 30,000. So 30,000 minus 6,000 will give you your 24,000. Okay. Class, so the four are very important, class. The four are very important. Beginning balance of the allowance represents what? Beginning balance of the allowance represents markup on beginning inventory. The the unadjusted balance of the allowance represents what? Markup on your tigas. Okay, unadjusted allowance. Okay, unadjusted allowance represents the markup on your tigas. The increases during the year represents the markup on the shipments during the year. Markup, the ending balance of the allowance represents what? The ending balance of the allowance account represents the markup on the ending inventory. And then lastly, the deduction or the adjustment to the allowance account represents the markup on your cost of goods sold.